Officer Richard Morrison held the crumpled piece of paper between his fingers with a mixture of concern and incredulity. The childish handwriting, uneven and stained by a few tears, told a story he would never have expected to find in Millbrook, a small, seemingly quiet Connecticut town. Please help. My stepfather Frank is making the neighborhood kids carry strange packages in their backpacks after school. He says he'll hurt my mom if I tell anyone. But I can't stand to see my friends scared anymore. The shaky signature at the end simply read Jimmy P. Morrison called his partner, Detective Andrea Martinez, who was analyzing the police station's security cameras. The images showed a skinny boy, no more than 10 years old, sliding the note under the front door at 6:15 in the morning, before the sun had fully risen. "We need to identify this boy," said Morrison, running his hand through his gray hair. "If that's true, I'm already checking the list of students from the local schools," interrupted Martinez, his nimble fingers typing on the computer. "Jimmy P. Must be James Parker. He lives at 247 Washington Street. Mother, Lisa Parker, married for 2 years to Franklin Davies." Morrison's heart squeezed. He knew that area, one of the pockets of poverty that Millbrook tried to hide behind its well-kept Victorian houses and impeccable gardens. Washington Street was a troubled area, with families struggling to make ends meet and children often going to school without breakfast. In previous weeks, the police station had received scattered reports of suspicious movement near Roosevelt Elementary School, but nothing concrete enough to warrant an in-depth investigation. Now, the pieces were beginning to fit together in a disturbing way. Morrison and Martinez decided to begin discreet surveillance. They strategically positioned themselves near the school at dismissal time, watching the students with their brightly colored backpacks. At first glance, everything seemed normal, but their years of experience made them notice small details. Some children walking with their heads down, looking nervously over their shoulders. Some backpacks seeming too heavy for ordinary school supplies. That's when they spotted Jimmy. The boy was walking alone, his shoulders tense, his hands clutching the straps of his backpack. A tall man with tattoos on his arms and a scar on his neck, who matched Franklin Davies' description, watched him from afar, leaning against a faded red pickup truck. "We need to proceed with caution," Martinez whispered. "If we scare Davies now, he could run away or, worse, do something against the boy's family." Over the next few days, the pair of investigators set up a silent operation. They discovered that Franklin Davies was not alone. He was part of a larger network that took advantage of the neighborhood's economic vulnerability. Families were promised money in exchange for small favors from the children, which consisted of carrying packages of drugs hidden in notebooks and books. What disturbed Morrison most was discovering that some families knew about the scheme. Financial desperation had led them to turn a blind eye to the danger their children were in. Others, like Lisa Parker, lived under constant threat, trapped in a cycle of fear and domestic violence. Jimmy Parker had shown extraordinary courage in writing that note. In his innocence, he found the strength to do what many adults couldn't: ask for help. The investigation needed to be quick and precise. Every day that passed was another day of children carrying drugs in their school bags, another day of stolen innocence. Morrison and Martinez worked tirelessly, building a solid case, identifying everyone involved, mapping routes and schedules. "We can't wait any longer," said Morrison one morning, after seeing yet another child discreetly approached by one of Davies' cronies. "Every minute that passes is an opportunity for something to go terribly wrong." Martinez agreed, and the operation was set up for the following day. Tactical teams were strategically positioned around the school and in the surrounding streets. Social workers and school counselors were alerted, ready to support the children and families. The plan was simple, but needed to be executed with surgical precision. They would wait for Davies and his associates to distribute the packages, document everything, and then close in. The top priority was to ensure the safety of the children and avoid any confrontation near the school. Morrison looked once more at the note that had started it all. The words, written in shaky handwriting by a 10-year-old boy, had exposed a deep wound in the community, a wound that needed not only to be closed, but truly healed. The operation that would unfold the next day would only be the beginning. Millbrook would need to face its own shadows. The hidden poverty, the silenced violence, the broken families. And, perhaps most importantly, it would have to learn to listen to its children, who often saw clearly what the adults preferred to ignore. As night fell over the city, Morrison couldn't stop thinking about Jimmy Parker and all the other children involved in this dark plot. Tomorrow, they would have the chance to make a difference. Tomorrow, they could start rebuilding the safety and trust that had been stolen from that community. The officer put the note in his drawer and locked it carefully. In a few hours, the operation would begin, and with it, it was hoped, the start of a necessary change in Millbrook. The sun had barely risen when the discreet vehicles began to position themselves strategically around Roosevelt Elementary School. Morrison and Martinez coordinated the operation from inside a surveillance van parked 2 blocks from the site, monitoring the images from the portable cameras positioned during the early hours of the morning. All units in position, Sergeant Roberts reported over the radio. Tactical team ready for interception on Washington Street and perimeter established within a 5-block radius. Martinez adjusted his bulletproof vest as he watched the first children arrive at school. Among them, Jimmy Parker walked with his head down, his faded blue backpack looking lighter than usual. The detective had spent the previous evening reviewing Franklin Davies' profile. 3 domestic violence convictions in other states, suspected involvement in drug trafficking in Massachusetts and Rhode Island, always escaping before the investigations were concluded. Suspicious movement in the red pickup truck, warned Morrison, zooming in on the camera. Davies was standing in the same place as always, but today there were 2 more men with him. One of them was carrying a pink school bag, apparently new. "We've identified the man on the right as Michael Reese," Martinez informed the other agents. "History of drug distribution in Hartford. The other one isn't in the system yet." The next few hours were intense observation. Investigators documented when Davies and his cronies discreetly approached 5 different children, all with similar profiles, low-income families, most with only one parent present, vulnerable to manipulation and threats. "We need more concrete evidence," Morrison whispered, his frustration evident in his voice. "We can't risk them getting away on legal technicalities." As if responding to his concerns, a girl of about 12 stopped next to the truck. Davies handed her the pink backpack they had seen earlier, exchanging it for the one she was already carrying. The exchange was quick, but the cameras caught it all. "Now," ordered Martinez over the radio. Cars appeared from all directions simultaneously, blocking any escape route. The tactical team approached with military precision, surprising Davies and his cronies before they could react. Morrison and Martinez ran towards the confusion. The girl with the pink backpack tried to run away, but Martinez gently caught up with her. "It's all right, sweetheart. You're not in trouble. We're here to help." Tears streamed down the girl's face as she sobbed. "They said they were going to hurt my little brother if I didn't help." The operation unfolded quickly. Davies and his associates were arrested without significant resistance. The backpack seized contained packages of cocaine and methamphetamine, cleverly hidden among notebooks and school bags. But the real challenge was just beginning. At the school, Principal Rachel Henderson had been informed of the situation and was cooperating with the authorities. A team of social workers and psychologists was already in place to support the children and families involved. "Is Jimmy Parker safe?" asked Morrison, worried about possible retaliation. "Yes," replied Martinez. He and his mother were taken to a safe house as soon as the operation began. Lisa Parker agreed to testify against Davies. The next few hours were devoted to careful interviews with the children identified in the scheme. Each story revealed a disturbing pattern of manipulation and threats. Some families had been lured by the promise of easy money in desperate financial times. Others had been coerced through violent threats. At the police station, Morrison watched through the glass of the interrogation room as Martinez questioned Davies. The man maintained an arrogant posture, but his restless hands betrayed his nervousness. "Did you really think you could use children indefinitely without anyone noticing?" asked Martinez, his voice laden with controlled contempt. Davies shrugged. "Nobody ever cared about these families before. Why should they care now?" Those words hit Morrison like a punch. Davies was partly right. The community had failed these families long before he came along. Poverty and neglect had created fertile ground for predators like him to thrive. At the end of that long day, Morrison sat at his desk, exhausted but determined. The operation had been a success, but it exposed much deeper problems in Millbrook. As he wrote his report, he began to formulate ideas for a child protection program in the region's schools. "We need to do more," he told Martinez, who was organizing the evidence he had collected. "We can't just arrest the bandits and think the problem is solved." "I agree," she replied, pausing her work. Avali talked to social worker Karen Miller. She has some interesting proposals for programs to support families in vulnerable situations. News of the operation spread quickly through the small town. Reporters from the local newspaper were already circulating in search of information, while on social media residents were expressing shock and indignation. Millbrook was being forced to face its own demons. Morrison kept Jimmy's note in a special folder. That crumpled piece of paper had been more than a complaint. It was a cry for help from a child who refused to remain silent in the face of injustice. Thanks to her courage, other children were now safer. Night fell over Millbrook as the final steps were taken. At Roosevelt School, Principal Henderson was already planning a series of meetings with parents and teachers to discuss preventative measures and identifying suspicious situations. The city was changing slowly but inevitably, forced to recognize that the safety of its children required more than just good intentions. News of the police operation at Roosevelt Elementary School spread like wildfire through Little Millbrook. The local newspaper, the Millbrook Herald, ran the headline, "Trafficking Network Used Children as Mules" on its front page, accompanied by photos of the arrests of Davies and his cronies. Principal Henderson faced a flood of calls from worried parents. Her secretary could barely manage the volume of calls, while teachers tried to keep the school routine as normal as possible for the students. However, the corridors of Roosevelt were different, quieter, laden with apprehensive glances and whispered conversations. Morrison and Martinez had spent the morning meeting with Mayor Robert Callahan, a middle-aged man who looked as if he had aged 10 years since learning of the criminal scheme in his city. "How did we let this happen right under our noses?" questioned Callahan, running his hands over his tired face. "Millbrook has always been considered a safe town. That's exactly why Davies chose this place," explained Martinez, spreading out photos and reports on the meeting table. No one would suspect such an operation in a small, seemingly quiet town. The investigation continued to reveal disturbing ramifications. Analysis of C's cell phones showed connections to drug cartels in Hartford and New Haven. Davies was just a middleman in a much larger network that had identified Millbrook as a strategic distribution point. In the safe house, Lisa Parker was trying to rebuild her life with Jimmy. The boy, despite the fear still visible in his eyes, showed surprising resilience. Social worker Karen Miller reported that he had begun to open up during therapy sessions. "He told me that he wrote the note after seeing his best friend, Kevin, crying hiding in the bathroom at school," Miller shared with Morrison during a visit to the shelter. Jimmy said he couldn't bear to see anyone else suffering. The community was beginning to react. Patricia Wilson, owner of the local bakery, organized a fundraiser to help the affected families. Reverend Michael Grant opened the church doors to community meetings where people could share their concerns and seek support. Martinez paid special attention to the children involved in the scam. Each testimony revealed a similar pattern of manipulation. Davies and his cronies first offered small amounts of money for seemingly innocent favors, such as handing over envelopes. Gradually, the demands increased, always accompanied by veiled threats. "We need to ensure that these children receive adequate psychological support," insisted Martinez during a meeting with the team. "The trauma doesn't end with the arrests." Morrison agreed, remembering how Jimmy's face lit up when he heard that other children were being helped. The boy had become an unwitting symbol of courage at Millbrook. Principal Henderson implemented immediate changes at Roosevelt. Security cameras were installed at all entry and exit points. Teachers received training to identify signs of abuse and manipulation. A mentoring program was established, pairing older students with younger ones. "We can't just react to this crisis," declared Henderson during a school assembly. "We need to create an environment where our children feel safe to ask for help before situations become critical." The investigations have also exposed deeper socioeconomic problems in Millbrook. Mayor Callahan was forced to acknowledge that the city had neglected its poorest neighborhoods for years. Washington Street and adjacent areas had become breeding grounds for criminals precisely because of this systematic neglect. "We are developing a revitalization plan," Callahan announced at a press conference, including after-school programs, street lighting improvements, and the creation of community centers. Martinez watched it all with a mixture of hope and skepticism. In his 15-year police career, he had seen similar promises made and forgotten. But something about Millbrook seemed different. Perhaps it was Jimmy's courage, inspiring others to speak out. Perhaps it was the shock of discovering that evil could hide in the most unlikely of places. Later that week, Morrison found a new note on his desk. This time, it was a colorful drawing by Jimmy, showing himself next to the officer, both wearing superhero capes. The text read simply, "Thank you for believing in me." The officer hung the drawing on his bulletin board, where it would serve as a constant reminder of the power of truth and courage, even when it came from the most unexpected sources. The town of Millbrook was changing. On the streets, in the schools, in people's conversations, there was a new sense of vigilance and shared responsibility. Innocence had been shattered, but in its place, something equally valuable was growing. The awareness that protecting children was everyone's responsibility. The investigations continued, revealing new connections and suspects. But for Morrison and Martinez, the Jimmy Parker case had become more than just another successful police operation. It was a turning point, a moment that would define how Millbrook would face its challenges from now on. The meeting room of the Millbrook Police Department was packed that Thursday morning. Morrison and Martinez were presenting the preliminary results of the investigation to a diverse audience that included social workers, school counselors, and representatives from the city government. The faces around the table reflected a mixture of shock and determination. Davy's connections go far beyond what we initially imagined, Martinez explained, projecting a digital map onto the wall. Red lines connected Millbrook to 5 other Connecticut towns, forming a complex web of drug distribution. "We're cooperating with the FBI to dismantle the entire operation." One of the social workers, Beth Cooper, raised her hand. "How are the children who were identified in the scheme, especially those whose parents were aware of the situation?" Morrison sighed heavily before answering. "We have 17 minors identified so far. 3 have been temporarily removed from their homes due to proven parental neglect. The others are receiving intensive follow-up, but remain with their families under supervision." The discussion was interrupted by an urgent knock on the door. It was Karen Miller, the social worker in charge of Jimmy Parker's case. Her normally calm face showed concern. "We need to talk," she told Morrison and Martinez. "It's about Jimmy." In the hallway, away from the others, Miller explained that Jimmy had begun to show signs of post-traumatic stress. He had a panic attack at school yesterday when he saw a red pickup truck stop near the playground. "Lisa is worried that he might regress." Martinez frowned. "I thought he was making good progress in his therapy sessions." "He was," confirmed Miller. "But the testimony he gave to the prosecution yesterday brought up a lot of memories. He had to relive traumatic moments in detail." Morrison felt a wave of guilt. Jimmy had become the unwitting hero of this story. But sometimes it was easy to forget that he was still just a 10-year-old child carrying too heavy a burden. Meanwhile, at Roosevelt School, Principal Henderson was implementing significant changes. Newly installed security cameras monitored every entrance and exit. Trained guards discreetly patrolled the perimeter. But the most important change was taking place inside the classrooms. "Today we're going to talk about confidence and courage," announced teacher Rachel Sullivan to her 5th grade class. On the wall, a new colorful poster proclaimed, "Heroes speak the truth." The children, still processing the recent events, actively participated in discussions about safety and the importance of seeking help. At the police station, the investigation continued to reveal deeper layers of the criminal scheme. Martinez spent hours analyzing phone records and bank transactions. A pattern began to emerge. Regular deposits into accounts of seemingly unconnected people, all living in low-income areas. They were buying the community's silence, Martinez concluded, showing his findings to Morrison. Small monthly payments to strategic people, janitors, even a school bus driver. News of the case had attracted national attention. Reporters from the big networks began arriving in Millbrook, turning the small town into a symbol of a bigger crisis. How could seemingly safe communities hide such dark secrets? How could children be protected in a world where danger could come from within their own homes? Mayor Callahan, pressured by the media and residents, announced a series of emergency measures. Funds were redirected to social programs, including housing assistance for vulnerable families and the expansion of after-school programs. "We can't change the past," he declared at a press conference, "but we can and must do better going forward." At the clinic where Jimmy was undergoing therapy, Dr. Sarah Bennett tried to help him process his experiences through art. The boy's drawings, once dominated by gloomy figures and dark colors, slowly began to incorporate more hopeful elements. "Do you feel safe now?" asked Dr. Bennett gently, watching Jimmy add a bright sun to his latest drawing. "Sometimes," he replied, carefully choosing a yellow pencil, "but I'm still afraid they'll come back." Jimmy's response echoed the sentiment of many in Millbrook. The sense of security had been fundamentally shattered, and rebuilding it would require more than just practical protection measures. Morrison, reviewing reports at his desk late at night, pondered how a community recovers from such a profound betrayal. Jimmy's note, now preserved as evidence, had exposed not only a criminal scheme, but also the social fractures that made it possible. The city was changing, slowly, but inevitably. At parents' meetings, in street corner conversations, in school corridors, people who once barely said hello now stop to chat, share concerns, offer help. "Maybe that's what Jimmy really taught us," commented Martinez, handing over another report for Morrison to sign. "That sometimes it takes a child to show us what's really important." The sun was setting over Millbrook, casting long shadows across the quiet streets. Somewhere in the town, Jimmy Parker was falling asleep in his new home, his dreams still occasionally troubled by memories of the past, but increasingly populated by hope for the future. Millbrook's story was far from over, but its darkest pages had been turned. The real challenge now was to ensure that the lessons learned were not forgotten, that the courage of a 10-year-old boy would continue to inspire change long after the media spotlight had faded. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as Jimmy Parker climbed into the witness box. At just 10 years old, he looked even smaller under the fluorescent lights and the watchful eyes of those present. Morrison and Martinez watched from the front row, trying to convey confidence with their encouraging smiles. "Can you tell us what happened outside the school, Jimmy?" asked Prosecutor Amandichin gently. Jimmy took a deep breath, his eyes deliberately avoiding the defense table where Franklin Davies was sitting. "At first, he said it was just to deliver envelopes, that he was going to help my mother with the bills." The boy's voice shook slightly, but he continued. The silence in the room was absolute as Jimmy described how Davies gradually increased his demands, how he threatened to hurt his mother, how he recruited other children using a mixture of promises and intimidation. Outside the courtroom, the media swarmed. The case had captured national attention, becoming a talking point about child vulnerability and community neglect. Reporters from the major networks were vying for space with local journalists, all eager for every new development. At the Roosevelt School, Jimmy's absence was noticed, but not commented on. His classmates had been instructed on how to deal with the situation, thanks to the new awareness program implemented by Principal Henderson. "You're very brave," said Teacher Sullivan during a special session with the class. "Sometimes doing the right thing is scary, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it." Meanwhile, Martinez was running a parallel operation behind the scenes. The connections uncovered through Davies' records had led to a wider investigation in 3 states. FBI agents now occupied a makeshift room in the Millbrook Police Station, coordinating simultaneous actions in several jurisdictions. "We have 5 more confirmed arrests in Hartford," informed Special Agent Rodriguez during an update meeting. "The cartel is falling apart, and it all started with a note from a 10-year-old boy." Lisa Parker, sitting in the hallway of the courthouse waiting for a moment to testify, nervously flipped through a notebook of Jimmy's drawings. The pages showed a startling progression, from the first dark, fuzzy images to more recent drawings showing his family at a new beginning. He's sleeping better now, she confided to Morrison during a break. He still has nightmares sometimes, but Dr. Bennett says it's normal, that he's processing everything in a healthy way. The trial stretched on for 3 days. The evidence was overwhelming. Phone records, financial transactions, testimony from other children and families involved. But it was Jimmy's testimony that really captured the essence of the case. "Why did you decide to write that note?" asked Prosecutor Chen. Jimmy looked directly at the jury for the first time. "Because it was wrong. Not just what they did to us, but how everyone pretended not to see it. I didn't want to pretend anymore." The sentence was announced on a rainy Friday. Davies and his main associates received maximum sentences, with aggravating factors for involving minors. When the judge banged his gavel, a collective sigh went through the room. At the police station, Morrison hung a framed copy of Jimmy's original note in the lobby, next to a new poster advertising the Millbrook Child Protection Program. The program, born out of the tragedy, was already being adopted by other cities in the state. "Sometimes you need a child to teach you about courage," commented Martinez, observing a group of students on a guided tour of the police station. The new program included regular visits by school classes, part of a larger effort to build bridges between the police and the community. The town of Millbrook was changing. At city council meetings, previously ignored social issues now dominated the agenda. Mayor Callahan, pressured by public opinion, had approved emergency funds for family assistance programs and improvements in poor neighborhoods. Jimmy and his mother moved into a new house closer to the school. The community mobilized to help them, from donated furniture to volunteers who helped them move. It was as if the whole town wanted to make up for years of closed eyes. At Jimmy's new school, a colorful mural decorated the main corridor. Painted by the students themselves, it showed children holding hands in a protective circle. Below, in large letters, "Courage begins with one voice." Dr. Bennett noticed significant changes in Jimmy during his weekly sessions. "He's starting to talk about the future," she shared with Morrison and Martinez during a follow-up meeting. "Not just about surviving the present." The Jimmy Parker case had become a turning point not only for Millbrook, but for similar communities across the country. Special reports explored how small towns could inadvertently create environments ripe for criminal activity and how community vigilance could make a difference. As fall approached, bringing with it a new school year, Morrison reflected on how a single courageous action could unleash waves of change. Jimmy's crumpled note had done more than expose a criminal scheme. It had woken up an entire town to its collective responsibilities. Lisa Parker got a new job at the municipal library, part of the social reintegration program. Jimmy was slowly becoming just a kid again, playing basketball after school, making new friends, laughing more easily. "You know what's funny?" Jimmy said to Morrison during a chance encounter at the local ice cream parlor. "Before, I was afraid of everything. Now, even when I'm scared, I know I'm not alone." 6 months after the Franklin Davies trial, the town of Millbrook had been transformed in subtle but significant ways. What began with a crumpled note left on the door of a police station had now become a movement inspiring change in communities across Connecticut. Morrison watched through his living room window as a group of children passed in front of the police station, wearing colorful uniforms from the new Community Guardians program, an initiative that was born directly out of the Parker case. The program trained young people to identify and report suspicious situations, always emphasizing the importance of personal safety. "You're not going to believe this," said Martinez, rushing into the room with a newspaper in hand. The headline in the Boston Globe read, "Millbrook Model: How a Small Town Revolutionized Child Protection." The article detailed how the program developed after the Parker case was being adapted by other cities. Hartford, New Haven, and even communities in Massachusetts were implementing versions of the school protection system created in Millbrook. "Has Jimmy seen this?" asked Morrison, picking up the paper. "Karen Miller said she's going to show it to him today during the session," replied Martinez. "He's doing incredibly well, you know." He started taking part in the school newspaper. Jimmy's first article for the school newspaper had been a brave piece about the importance of speaking the truth, even when it's scary. Without directly mentioning his own experience, he managed to convey a powerful message about courage and community responsibility. At Roosevelt School, the changes were even more evident. Principal Henderson had transformed the old security system into an integrated model of protection and support. Discrete surveillance cameras monitored the perimeters, while trained counselors circulated the halls, always available for conversation. The most impressive thing, commented Henderson during a school board meeting, is how the children themselves have changed. They are no longer afraid to speak up when something seems wrong. Mayor Callahan, who initially seemed overwhelmed by the crisis, had found a new purpose. Under his leadership, Millbrook implemented a comprehensive social assistance program, focusing especially on low-income families. Washington Street, previously neglected, now received special attention from the city administration. "We can't change the past," Callahan declared during the inauguration of a new community center, "but we can ensure that our children have a better and safer future." Lisa Parker had become an active voice in the community. Her work at the municipal library expanded to include a literacy program for underprivileged families. On Thursday afternoons, she ran a support group for single parents, sharing her own journey of recovery and empowerment. "Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, worried," she confided to Morrison during one of the community meetings. "But then I hear Jimmy laughing in his room, or see him playing with his new friends, and I know we did the right thing." The FBI continued to dismantle the ramifications of Davies' network. Each new discovery confirmed how crucial the Parker case had been in exposing a criminal operation that stretched across 3 states. Special Agent Rodriguez often cited Millbrook as an example of how cooperation between the community and authorities could produce extraordinary results. "It's like a positive domino effect," Martinez explained during a lecture at the State Police Academy. One act of courage inspired others, who in turn inspired more people to speak out. At Dr. Bennett's clinic, the sessions with Jimmy had evolved from trauma therapy to conversations about his dreams and aspirations. The boy who used to draw dark pictures was now creating comic strips about a young detective who helped other children. "I want to be a policeman when I grow up," Jimmy announced over lunch with Morrison and Martinez. "Or maybe a journalist. Something that helps tell the truth." Millbrook's transformation has not gone unnoticed by the national media. A team from 60 Minutes visited the town for a special report on how small communities could face big challenges. The producer was particularly impressed by the level of community engagement. "It's rare to see an entire town come together like this," he commented during the shoot. "Usually after a crisis, people try to forget and move on. Here, you've turned tragedy into a catalyst for positive change." Morrison, organizing his desk at the end of another day, found a recent photo of Jimmy with his basketball team. The boy was smiling openly, without a trace of the fear that once shadowed his face. Next to the photo, framed on the wall, was the original note that had started it all. "Sometimes I wonder," said Martinez, standing in the doorway, "how many other stories like this are out there, waiting for someone brave enough to tell them." "That's why our work never ends," Morrison replied, standing up. "Every Jimmy Parker we help can inspire another to speak out, to seek help." On the way out of the police station, they found a group of children from the Guardians of the Community program sticking up posters about an awareness campaign. Jimmy was among them, helping the younger ones reach the highest points of the wall. "Hey officers," he called out, waving cheerfully. "Come and see our new posters." Morrison and Martinez approached, looking at the colorful posters that proclaimed messages of hope and courage. On one of them, written in large letters, was the phrase that had become Millbrook's unofficial motto: "Truth begins with a voice." The sun was setting over the town, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple. Somewhere, a church bell was ringing, its sound echoing through the now safer streets. Millbrook had changed, not only in its physical structures and social programs, but in the heart of its community. The legacy of Jimmy Parker's note would continue to inspire generations to come, reminding everyone that the courage of a single child can be the catalyst for transforming an entire town. And as the stars began to appear in the evening sky, Millbrook shone as a beacon of hope for other communities, proving that even the smallest voices can echo beyond all expectations.